It is May of 1959. A Soviet search team is waist-deep in snow in the northern Ural Mountains of Russia. They have been out here for weeks. The temperature has not climbed above zero. The wind does not stop. The mountain gives nothing back. They have already found 5 bodies. They thought the worst was over. It was not. Beneath the frozen surface of a ravine, buried under more than 13 feet of compacted snow, they find 4 more. And what they find on those 4 bodies will be studied, argued over, investigated, and never fully explained for the next 66 years, because there is no explanation that accounts for all of it. 1 has a shattered skull. 2 have rib cages that have been crushed completely inward, not by a fall, not by a weapon, by a force that investigators would later compare, formally and in writing, to the impact of a high-speed car crash. There are no external wounds on the skin, no bruising on the surface, no cuts, nothing on the outside of the body to explain what happened on the inside. And 1 of them has no tongue. Nobody attacked them. There are no foreign footprints anywhere in the surrounding snow. No weapon was ever recovered. No credible suspect was ever identified. The Soviet government closed the investigation with a single sentence, and that sentence explained absolutely nothing. 9 experienced hikers. Dead in some of the most remote mountains in Russia, in ways that, to this day, cannot be fully explained. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and the more you learn about it, the less sense it makes. Let me take you back to the beginning. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. Because the scariest part of this story is not the injuries, it is not the missing tongue, it is not the radiation. The scariest part is who these people were. This was not a group of reckless teenagers who wandered into the mountains on a dare. These were trained, experienced mountaineers. Several were graduate engineering students, analytical, methodical, rational people. The expedition was classified as Grade 3, the highest difficulty certification in the entire Soviet hiking system. They knew exactly what they were doing. The group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, respected, meticulous, not someone who panicked. I want to name all of them because they deserve to be remembered as people before we talk about what happened to them. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonyshenko, Rustem Slobodin, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. 9 people. Every one of them trained, every one of them dead. There was a 10th member. His name was Yuri Yudin. He fell ill early in the journey and turned back. That decision saved his life. He was the last person to see the other 9 alive, and he spent the rest of his days. He died in 2013, saying he never accepted the official explanation. He believes something happened on that mountain that was never made public. We will come back to him. Their destination was Otorten Mountain, deep in the northern Ural Mountains. To reach it, they had to cross the eastern slope of a neighboring peak. That peak was called Kholat Shachel. In the local Mansi language, Kholat Shachel means one thing: Mountain of the Dead. That name existed long before 1959. The Mansi people gave it that name before any of these hikers were born. They had a reason. That reason has been lost to history. On the 23rd of January, 1959, Igor Dyatlov and his group boarded a train in Sverdlovsk. They traveled by train, then by truck, deeper into one of the most isolated regions in the Soviet Union. By all accounts, they were in good spirits. On the 28th of January, Yuri Yudin fell ill. He said his goodbyes, hugged his friends, and watched them go. He never saw any of them again. By the 31st of January, the remaining 9 had reached the base of Kholat Shachel. The weather was deteriorating. Wind, snow, temperatures dropping fast. On the 1st of February, instead of descending into the nearby forest where the trees would have sheltered them, they pitched their tent on the open, exposed slope of the mountain. Why they made that choice has never been definitively answered. Some think they wanted to preserve altitude. Others believe the worsening conditions made descent feel riskier. The temperature that night was somewhere between 13 and 22 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. After that night, no one outside the group ever saw them alive again. The group was supposed to send a telegram when they finished the expedition, It never came. By the 26th of February, when no word had arrived and no one had returned, a search party was sent into the mountains. What they found at the camp made no logical sense, and 66 years later, it still does not. The tent was still standing on the slope, exactly where the group had pitched it. Inside, almost everything had been left behind. Boots, jackets, cold weather gear, food, flashlights, all of it, untouched, still there. No signs of a struggle inside the tent, no blood, no overturned equipment, nothing to suggest chaos. Except the tent had been cut open from the inside, not torn by wind, not collapsed under snow. Deliberately slashed through the side wall with a knife from the inside to create an opening large enough to climb through. There are two ways out of a tent: the entrance or through the wall. They chose to cut through the wall. That tells you something. Either the entrance was blocked by something on the outside they could not or would not approach, or the panic was so sudden, so absolute, that stopping to unzip a door was not a thought that occurred to any of them. Either possibility should disturb you. Search teams followed the tracks leading away from the tent down the slope. And here is what makes the whole thing worse. The footprints were orderly, not running, not stumbling, not the chaotic impressions of people fleeing in terror. Walking, in a group, calmly. Some were barefoot, some in socks, some in only their underwear. In temperatures that would kill an unprotected person within a matter of hours. These were experienced hikers. They had trained for conditions exactly like this. They knew what exposure at those temperatures would do to a human body. They knew they were walking into a death sentence, and they walked anyway, calmly. Whatever was in that tent or outside that tent, whatever they heard or felt or somehow sensed in those minutes, it was more terrifying to them than certain death in the open cold. That is the question at the center of this entire case, and it has never been answered. Search teams followed the footprints from the tent down the slope. What they found over the next days and weeks told a story, but a story with no beginning. The first two bodies were discovered about 1.5 miles from the tent at the edge of the tree line. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko, barefoot, wearing only underwear, hands scraped raw. The remains of a small fire nearby, and the cedar tree above them had branches snapped off up to 15 feet high. They had climbed it, in the dark, barefoot, in negative 22-degree temperatures. They climbed that tree to look back up the slope toward the tent. Whatever they saw from up there, we will never know. Between the tree and the tent, 3 more bodies were found in the snow. Igor Dyatlov, Sinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin. Their positions told investigators something quietly devastating. They were not moving away from the tent. They were trying to return to it. They had turned back, and they did not make it. All 3 died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a fractured skull, but the cold killed him before the injury could. That was 5. 4 were still missing, and search teams would not find them for another 2 months. In May of 1959, probing rods located the last 4 bodies under more than 13 feet of snow in a ravine near the cedar tree. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov. Thibault-Brignol had a massive skull fracture. Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs on both sides of his chest. Dubinina had severe chest trauma and damage to the heart tissue. Kolovatov had severe deformation of the cervical spine. Investigators formally stated the force required to cause those chest injuries was comparable to a high-speed automobile collision. And there were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin, nothing on the outside of the body to explain what had happened on the inside. Dubinina had no tongue, no eyes. Portions of the facial tissue were gone. The most grounded scientific explanation is accelerated decomposition from water exposure in the ravine. Soft tissue disappears first. That explanation is probably correct. It does not make it any easier to sit with. But here is the detail that most retellings skip. Some of the ravine victims were wearing clothing cut from the bodies of the first 2 hikers, Doroshenko and Krivonashenko, who had already died under the cedar tree. Someone removed clothing from their dead friends and put it on themselves. That means at least some of the Ravine Four were alive long enough to watch their teammates die one by one, and still had enough presence of mind to make a rational survival decision. They were thinking clearly. They were fighting to live, and every single one of them still died. If you have made it this far and this story is getting under your skin, drop the word frozen in the comments right now. I want to see who is still here. Everything so far has a potential explanation, however grim. Hypothermia, panic in the dark, a fall into a ravine. But then there is the other evidence, the pieces that do not fit cleanly into any natural framework, and that have kept researchers, investigators, and obsessive communities up at night for 66 years. Some of the clothing recovered from the group tested positive for radioactive contamination. This is not a rumor. This is not a fringe claim. This is confirmed in the official investigative record. Possible explanations include prior occupational exposure. Several of the hikers had worked in or near nuclear facilities, or low-level environmental contamination from Soviet nuclear activity in the wider Ural region. Both of those explanations are theoretically plausible, but neither of them cleanly answers why only specific garments were affected, or why the contamination levels on certain items were high enough to register on detection equipment weeks after the deaths occurred. That question has no satisfying answer. Then there are the lights, a separate hiking group operating in the same region of the Ural Mountains around the same time reported seeing glowing orange spheres moving through the night sky. Large, silent, moving, multiple witnesses, independent accounts, the same description given separately. Here is what changes the weight of that. The chief investigator on the official Soviet inquiry, not a journalist, not a theorist, the man who ran the government investigation, who reviewed every piece of evidence and interviewed every witness, later stated on record that he personally believed the lights were connected to what happened to the group. He was never able to prove it, but after everything he had seen, he could not dismiss it. He never stopped believing it. Some witnesses who viewed the recovered bodies also noted unusual physical changes. Skin that appeared deeply orange or darkened. Hair on some of the victims that appeared to have turned gray. Standard forensic explanations point to decomposition and prolonged environmental exposure, both of which can dramatically alter the appearance of human tissue. Those explanations are almost certainly correct, but the discoloration was distinctive enough that it was specifically noted in the official reports at the time. And then the Soviet government closed the case. After months of investigation, after the tent, the footprints, the radiation, the injuries, the lights, the bodies, the official conclusion was a single sentence. The hikers died as a result of a compelling natural force. That was it. No elaboration, no specifics. The files were classified and sealed, and they stayed that way for decades. In a country that controlled information as tightly as the Soviet Union did, that non-answer is its own kind of message. It tells you that someone decided this was not something the public was meant to understand. And that decision, that deliberate silence, may be the most unsettling piece of evidence in the entire case. 66 years of investigation have produced no shortage of theories. Here are the ones that deserve serious consideration. The avalanche. In 2020, Russian investigators formally concluded that a small slab avalanche most likely struck the tent while the group slept, forcing them to cut their way out. Swiss researchers built computer models supporting the plausibility of this and demonstrated that the chest injuries could theoretically result from the weight of snow at the right angle. The problems are hard to ignore. No significant avalanche debris was found at the site. The tent itself was not buried, and the footprints leading away from the camp were intact. A snow event powerful enough to cause car crash-level internal injuries would almost certainly have destroyed them. The avalanche theory explains some of the evidence. It does not explain all of it. Military testing. The Soviet Union in 1959 was conducting weapons tests throughout the Ural region. Consider what lines up. Radiation on specific clothing items. Witness reports of glowing orange spheres matching contemporary descriptions of certain experimental Soviet munitions. A government with every reason to cover up a military accident and an injury profile. Massive internal trauma with no external wounds. that is consistent with the overpressure wave produced by a shockwave weapon. A pressure wave from an experimental device could cause exactly the kind of internal crush injuries found on those bodies, with nothing visible on the skin. And when a military test accidentally kills 9 civilians, what does the government say? You say compelling natural force. You classify the files. You wait for the world to forget. There is no confirmed proof this happened. There is also no confirmed proof it did not. And in a country that classified everything, the absence of evidence is exactly what a cover-up looks like. Infrasound is real, documented science. It refers to sound frequencies below the threshold of human hearing. You cannot consciously detect them, but your body responds to them. At sufficient intensities, infrasound exposure has been shown to cause disorientation, irrational dread, visual disturbances, and uncontrollable panic that bypasses rational thought. Certain mountain terrain geometries can generate infrasound naturally under the right wind conditions. The slope of Kalatz-Shakel is the type of geography where this is possible. This theory says the group was hit by an infrasound event while sleeping, that without hearing or seeing anything, their bodies were overwhelmed by a primal terror response they had no way to consciously understand or fight. That they cut out of the tent and walked away, not because of something identifiable, but because every instinct they had was screaming at them to leave. It explains the calm footprints. Infrasound panic does not produce running. It produces a desperate, compulsive need to get away from where you are. Walk, keep moving. It does not explain the injuries or the radiation, but as an explanation for why they left in the first place, it may be the most scientifically credible theory we have. The unknown. And then there is the possibility that no single theory is sufficient, that what happened at Dyatlov Pass in the early hours of the 2nd of February, 1959, sits outside the boundaries of what we have managed to model or replicate. Here is what we know with certainty. The tent was cut from the inside. 9 trained hikers walked calmly into lethal cold without their gear. Some died of hypothermia, some died of injuries with no external explanation. Radiation was found. Lights were seen. The lead investigator suspected a connection. The government sealed the files. 66 years of investigation, multiple official inquiries, computer modeling, independent researchers across a dozen countries. And not one theory has ever accounted for all of that evidence at the same time. So I want to ask you directly, what do you think happened? The avalanche that left no debris? The military tests the government buried? The infrasound that drove 9 rational people out of their minds? Or something else? Tell me in the comments. Because the truth here, whatever it is, has never been simple. We have been through all of it. The tent, the footprints, the bodies, the injuries, the radiation, the theories. We have looked at it from every angle that 66 years of investigation has produced, and every time we come back to the same place. 9 experienced, rational, trained human beings decided on the night of the 1st of February, 1959, that cutting open their only shelter and walking into lethal cold was the right thing to do. They left their boots, they left their food, they left the gear that was designed to keep them alive, and they walked away from it calmly. Not the injuries, not the missing tongue, not even the radiation. The footprints are what I cannot stop thinking about, because those footprints tell you something that no forensic report can fully capture. They tell you that in that moment, on that slope, in that darkness, at 22 below zero, walking out without protection felt like the rational decision, the sane choice, the thing a thinking, conscious, experienced person would do. Something made them believe that staying was more dangerous than dying outside. We do not know what that something was, and that is the part that never leaves you. Yuri Yudin went back to the pass over the years. He attended memorials for his friends. He gave interviews. He refused to stop talking about it because he felt that if he stopped, no one would keep looking. And every single time someone asked him whether he believed the official explanation, the compelling natural force, the sealed files, the government's silence, he gave the same answer. No. He believed something happened on that mountain that was deliberately kept from the world. He died in 2013 without ever knowing what it was. None of us have gotten an answer either. And then there is always the name, Kalatz-Shakel, Mountain of the Dead. That name existed long before 1959, long before 9 hikers said goodbye to their families and walked into those mountains. The Mansi people had been calling it that for generations before any of this happened. They knew something about that place, and whatever it was they knew, 9 people found out the hard way. 9 people walked into those mountains and never came back. 66 years later, on a planet with satellites and forensic science and the full weight of modern investigation behind us, we still cannot tell you exactly what killed them. If this story got under your skin, hit that like button. It is the biggest thing you can do to keep this channel going and keep these stories coming. Subscribe if you are not already here. This is what we do. The strangest, darkest, most unexplained events in human history, told as completely and honestly as possible. 2 things in the comments. First, what do you think happened at Dyatlov Pass? I read every single one and I want to know where you land. And second, what should I cover next? It has to be on this level. Real events, real mysteries, things that actually happened and still have no answer. Drop your suggestions below. The best one becomes the next video. I will see you in the dark.